Hello, it's Mr. Otway's Sunday night intervention. I'm going to go through questions on a Sunday night that we think might be crucial for you this summer. First of all, we've got how far do you agree with interpretation 1 about the effectiveness of Operation Rolling Thunder? It's a 16-mark question. Now, to be able to assess interpretation 1, which if you want to keep looking at the 2 interpretations, go back to the start of the video and pause. And you really do need a lot of knowledge about Operation Rolling Thunder, because you can't criticise or praise a historian for what they say unless you know about what they're talking about. So, what's my first thing? First thing to know is it started in 1965. Now, I originally wrote 7th of February and crossed it out because although the textbook that I was reading, one of the official textbooks, says the 7th of February, I have done a bit of research on the internet and there's a lot of different dates thrown about when it started. So it's easy to just say early 1965, Operation Rolling Thunder got going. This was a bombing campaign, as it says on my next thing, I believe. The aim was to bomb North Vietnam. So if you remember from the Vietnam War, you've got South Vietnam, capitalist, supported by America, and North Vietnam, communist. Well, it was supposed to be an 8-week bombing campaign, and it was supposed to make the North give up what they were doing, which was supplying the Viet Cong in the South and sending soldiers south and basically fighting against the communists. It was supposed to make them sort of give in and compromise. It was supposed to last 8 weeks. It ended up lasting pretty much 3.5 years. So that first thing, I don't know, that can either point to success, like that it was effective, so therefore they kept doing it, or that it wasn't, it didn't work, so they had to keep doing it. That could go one of 2 ways, but it's useful information. What have we got next? Another little fact for you, that more bombs were dropped on North Vietnam than was dropped in the whole of the Second World War on Germany by both America and the United Kingdom. The point of this fact is there's just colossal amount of destruction, colossal amount of bombs dropped on North Vietnam. Well, so what I'm going through now is we're going to look at whether this Operation Rolling Thunder was a success, i.e. was it effective, or was it a failure? Because that's going to help us to assess the interpretations, which I will come back to. So the first thing, which is a possible success of Operation Rolling Thunder, they did bomb some of the supply routes into South Vietnam, which would have disrupted them. On the back of that, though, they never stopped the supply routes. The supply routes were never blocked because there were so many different supply routes. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was not just one path. So there was always a way round where the bombing had taken place. And also part of the aim of the bombing was to disrupt the North's ability to wage war, to fight. Usually, you would take out the enemy's factories, the places that they make tanks and weapons and all that sort of stuff. Well, North Vietnam didn't really have much in the way of industry. It was a really poor nation, didn't have the same, they had some factories, but didn't have the same level. Most of the supplies actually came through China. Some of them came from the Soviet Union, some of them came from China, but that's the route that they came into Vietnam. And America couldn't do that, they couldn't stop that with its bombing campaign. So, although it disrupted the supply route, it never stopped the supply route. And bombing the factories was only going to, and there's not that many factories in the first place, it was only going to have a minimal impact. But something to the success. Well, it did definitely cause huge, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage to North Vietnamese cities and towns, which is going to make it difficult to fight and wage war. Sounds like a success, that sounds effective. But the result of this, well, you think about, we sort of in Britain, we go mad for the Blitz, don't we? Like we were bombed by the Germans, but we never gave in. Keep calm and carry on, all that sort of stuff. When the Nazis bombed Britain, we didn't go, oh, please stop. Britain pulled up their socks, they fought back, they carried on the war. It made them more determined to succeed, and this is what happened in North Vietnam. Getting bombed did not make the North Vietnamese go, oh no, let's give in. It made them furious, livid and angry at the Americans. it just increased support for the war. So it was like basically a recruitment tool for the North Vietnamese. It would help them recruit volunteers to go on and fight in the south. To add to that failure, and you're starting to see what I think about Operation Rolling Thunder, hundreds of US planes were shot down, killing Americans. Many were taken prisoner. This might sound like a success. 2 million Vietnamese estimated, we can never know, but estimated to have been killed in the whole war, not just from Operation Rolling Thunder, which historians sort of keep to that 3.5 year window, but in the whole war, 2 million Vietnamese were killed. Sounds like a success, but no, a lot of those were civilians, which brings back to the last point. This is just going to create support for the war in North Vietnam, an anti-American feeling. So even the deaths that the bombing caused were not really effective in helping America win the war. Oh, but there's more. This seems like a success. And again, an estimated $300 million worth of damage was caused in North Vietnam by this bombing. But $900 million is the estimate of the total cost of all the US planes that were shot down over North Vietnam. So it was costing America more just in the planes. I mean, that's without taking into account the cost of all the bombs and fueling and training the pilots and blah, 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 blah. So in terms of raw economics, it wasn't really cost effective. Oh, and there's more. The whole aim, I mean, if you're thinking of how effective was it, what were they trying to do? What they were trying to do, as I've already said, is they were trying to get the North to accept the South as a capitalist nation and not to try to overthrow it and reunite Vietnam. It aimed to force them to compromise, to go, okay, you're bombing our country, but we want to come to the table. Ultimately, that failed. It didn't make the North Vietnamese any more likely to compromise. In fact, possibly it made them less likely to. So there's some knowledge. Now you need to have a little think and look at the interpretations, which I'll just put up on the screen again for you. What do we do with interpretation questions? Well, you certainly have to assess each interpretation. So you start with one interpretation and you've got to pick out quotes. What are the key assertions, the arguments that this historian is making? Try not to pick out like easy facts, but things that you could go, well, that's an argument then. That's an opinion of the historian. It's an assertion. So you pick out the quotes and you judge them. What this historian's saying is a little bit misleading, or it's a really accurate, insightful point. But then, and this is the crucial bit, you've got to prove your judgments with knowledge. So if you're saying what that historian is saying is a little bit misleading, you've then got to say why. And my favourite phrase for this is to say, this is a really misleading statement because history tells us that. I always use that phrase, history tells us that. It just sounds a bit more professional than from my own knowledge, I know. And you do that for both interpretations. Even though the question says, how far do you agree with interpretation 1 or interpretation 2, you do have to do this on both interpretations. As it says here, you absolutely must write about both interpretations. It's useful to do 2 paragraphs, 1 on each interpretation, or 4 2 short paragraphs on each interpretation. And it's better to do a conclusion than not, but if you run out of time, that's not absolutely wholly necessary, so long as within your answer you've written about how convincing you feel the interpretations are. But for this, knowledge is key for this answer. You're not writing about Operation Rolling Thunder just generally, but knowledge is key in order for you to be able to understand the interpretations enough to be able to go, I'm not sure about that bit, not sure about that bit. So looking at the 2 interpretations, I agree most with interpretation 1 rather than interpretation 2, as you might have gathered from what I said. But there are some things I could pick about. I would say I agree to a large extent with interpretation 1, but not necessarily with everything in interpretation 1. For example, it does say the return on the investment was negligible. In other words, although the Americans dropped all of those tons of bombs on North Vietnam, it didn't do that much damage compared to the amount of bombs that were dropped. Well, I could say this is slightly misleading because, as I've already told you, it did cause $300 million worth of damage on North Vietnam. So, the return, it's too far to call it tiny. Not enough, fine, but to call it a tiny amount of damage is a bit too far. However, it then goes on to say, it suggests, estimates by 1967 suggest that it cost the US $9.60 to inflict a dollar's worth of damage. And that seems to be, like, tailoring what I know from history, this seems to be an astute point. It's saying, in addition, the fighter bombers that carried out the bulk of the bombing stood only a 50% chance of surviving their one-year tour of duty. Well, there's the bottom bit of it here. Say, yeah, okay, it is the cost is way outweighing the expenditure here, the amount that America are having to put in to do this damage, and also lots of planes were shot down. I've got a statistic to back that up. Interpretation 2 seems to suggest that this whole bombing thing was actually really useful. And I would really say I completely disagree with interpretation 2. There's very little that it says that I can agree with. And in particular, as I've said, with this one, yeah, it did a lot of damage. Lots of bombs were dropped on key targets in North Vietnam. But they could never stop the supply. And also, what was the aim of Operation Rolling Thunder? Of course, as we've said, it was to get the North to compromise and to stop what they were doing in terms of trying to overthrow the Southern government. And they didn't do that. So, I can't agree with interpretation, but I can agree with a very large extent with interpretation 1. Especially it says there the North's war supplies came in the main from its communist allies. America could not risk bombing the Soviet Union and China. That would show that I understand who their communist allies were. There's lots of little quotes that you can pick out and say, I can agree with that, I can disagree with that, if you've got the knowledge that I've just shown you. So hopefully, if you've had a go at doing it, you can see you've written about interpretation 1, you've written about interpretation 2, you've picked quotes out, you've said how much you agree with those specific quotes, and then you've picked some knowledge to back up those judgments. So there you go. How far do we with interpretation 1? I better go find out what's coming up next week. Oh yes, here we go. If you want to tune in next Sunday for my next bit and have a go at a question before then, it's a bit easier to do on like this sort of intervention on a pure essay. And this is a pure essay, the next one. So the next one is going to be write a narrative account analysing the creation of Soviet satellite states in Eastern Europe, 1944 to 1948. So how did the Soviet Union turn countries in Eastern Europe into being Soviet satellite states? How did they make them communist and basically under the control of the Soviet Union? That's next week. You should see that question up on screen. If you haven't got that, next Sunday I'll be going through how I might answer that question. Hope that's useful. Thanks very much.